Jessica.
All right. Hopefully, I will not get the notification that I'm running low on system resources and all of that fun stuff, so that we won't have any issues with technology. So, good evening, everyone. I will just turn it over to Randy and Rick to kind of get this evening for the joint meeting of the Scarborough Conservation Commission and Sustainability Committee. Randy has asked that rather than an official roll call vote, if we kind of have people introduce themselves around the table, since we are a combined group tonight. So we will do that. And then do you want to do that before you do the land acknowledgement?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
You start and pass it to your right.
Sure. So I'm Jamie Fitch, the Town Sustainability Coordinator.
I'm Noah Perlet. I'm on the Conservation Commission and also on the Land Bond Committee.
I'm Chuck Spanger. I'm on the Conservation Commission.
Jessica Sargent. I am on the Conservation Commission. I'm an alternate, and I am on the Parks and Land Board.
Todd Souza, Director of Community Services.
Eric Sanderson, planner.
Angela Blanchett, town engineer.
Anton Boder, Sustainability Committee.
Rick Minking, Sustainability Committee and Planning Board.
Randy Hogan's Conservation Commission.
April Seiler, Town Council, and I am the liaison to both the Sustainability Committee and the Conservation Commission.
And joining us by video.
Why don't we start with Tom Loader?
Tom Loader, Sustainability Committee.
Richard Harvey
Richard Harvey, Conservation Commission.
and Rita Breton.
Yes, Rita Breton, Conservation Commission.
We also have a virtual attendee, Amber Mackey from Scarborough Land Trust is attending as well. And do you want to do?
Yeah, we have just two people in the room. If you want to state your name, we'd love to hear it.
My name's Julia Ernest, and I'm just curious.
Thank you, Julia.
I'm Dan Baker. I'm the Development Director for Crossroads Holdings, which is the owners of Scarborough.
Hi, Dan. I want to begin our time together with an acknowledgement honoring all Indigenous people, the people who came here before us and nurtured this place as stewards of Mother Earth, the first people. I make this acknowledgement aware that this land is unceded and that issues of water and territorial rights and encroachment upon sacred sites are ongoing in the Wabanaki homeland. I acknowledge the Waskawag people who once lived in what is now Scarborough, and that as we support efforts for land and water protection, we honor the current tribes who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And this is an exciting evening because this is a joint meeting of the Sustainability Committee and the Conservation Commission to talk about how we might review a request for a waiver to the growth management ordinance and offer our thoughts together, have a joint committee meeting because we have some common interests and begin to work together to determine how we might advise town council or others and how we'd like to support the town. And I want to acknowledge Marla. If you could just state your name. We took roll.
Okay, sorry. I got caught in construction. So my name is Marla Zando, and I've applied to be on the Conservation Commission, but I'm still waiting here.
Oh.
Wait, what? Now am I official?
Yeah.
You're approved,
Wait, I
baby.
didn't know this.
Wait, I thought Tony was supposed to be there.
I think you maybe just need to be sworn in, but you were appointed.
Oh, I was.
You were appointed.
So
So-
Under the table.
Okay, all right, thank you. I didn't know that. That's so funny.
That's good to know. It wasn't clear to me either. Hi, Marla.
Hi, Rita. Yes. So,
We'll get
and I
that
was on the
clarified.
Pest Management Advisory Committee,
Yes.
and then we merged with the Conservation Commission, and then I applied to be on the Conservation Commission, so. Thank you.
Glad you're here
Sorry, I
tonight.
apologize for the late.
So the The main business that we have tonight is the Downs GMO waiver request. Thanks to Jamie for sending us a lot of the background resources to review. And as I said, we would have this opportunity to discuss some potential recommendations and talk about next steps before we adjourn. So that's the recommended meeting agenda. Any discussion on that?
No, did you want to do anything about your land acknowledgement?
I just.
Oh,
read
yeah, that was,
Yeah.
okay, all right, so that was that. I think we have some people in the audience that I would make a motion that we have an opportunity for a public hearing. And I'll let you direct that as being the chair of this joint meeting.
Okay,
But I would make that motion to add that to the agenda.
sounds good to me. Anybody have any concerns about that? I think in terms of time, we were to start our discussion at 6:05. So if everyone's good, it's about 6:10 now. Let's give up to 10 minutes for public comment. And then we can begin our discussion. So welcome anybody who wants to speak, either online or.
I don't know if I go to the podium or what your,
What works for everyone?
Wherever you're
what your
comfortable.
format is.
There is no format.
There's no format, Shannon. Maybe some.
It's a committee meeting, you can sit at the table if you want, if it makes it easier.
Yeah, it might make it easier
Yeah,
if you
I
are able to
don't
be
think
If
seen
you're
by
at the
the
end, we'll all be able to see you. You won't be
except for the
behind
people
you.
on.
I'll stand here, and then if there's other.
I mean, I think the owl will pick you up.
Okay.
Next to Rick, he's had all his shots.
So, thanks, my name is Dan Bacon, I'm here on behalf of the Downs, I'm just here reviewing the GMO exemption. And I didn't come with prepared remarks, because I wasn't really aware of the, sort of the substance of your review until kind of late last week. In looking at the material that you have and maybe some of the recommendations, I did want to make the committee aware that a lot of the things sort of listed out as potential kind of concepts are things we've actually been working on through our master planning process over the last few years, for sure, especially around open space and land conservation. I know it's certainly a keen interest of the Conservation Commission. We're a direct abutter to Warren Woods. I know Rick knows that. With the Innovation District, and we recently deeded some additional land to Warren Woods. We've also already installed in the Innovation District some parking for trailhead parking, and begun to build out a trail system within the project that ties into Warren Woods. And also, really, ultimately, it will include the entire project. And that's a trail system that's not just for businesses or residents within the project, but it's public trails. And so that's been a long-standing kind of vision for the project and something that we've been working on quite incrementally. And we're now getting into kind of the thrust of our trails and open space with that work with the Land Trust. And we plan to continue to work with the Land Trust in the future. We've also been working a lot around EVs and charging, as well as being kind of solar ready with conduit within a lot of the buildings that we're doing. So I didn't know how aware both committees were of some of these things, because we're mostly kind of doing that through our master planning process, sometimes with the planning board, sometimes on our own kind of initiative. And didn't want you to have conversations about a GMO exemption, not understanding the stuff they're already doing. So not knowing what else you have on your mind, I guess I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have discussion or want to ask questions.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In terms of your GMO request, what do you envision that encompassing? I read your package, but it would be nice to refresh it for my benefit and others.
Sure.
What do you envision in terms of how many extra units are you going to be building there? I mean, what is the nature of the exemption you're requesting?
I should have started there, but I knew that we had a short amount of time in terms of my introduction and my public comments. So the reason that we're even applying to the council for a GMO exemption, a growth management ordinance exemption, is under the new growth management ordinance passed about a year ago. The Downs and a number of other projects are only allowed a certain number of units per year. So to be constructed, for Crossroads, the zone that we're in, it's 43 units per year. And the nature of the Downs project itself and the type of units that we had been building before the most recent change to the ordinance aren't really possible with that kind of limitation, particularly as we get into the town center area of the project, where we're planning on having mixed-use buildings. So apartments and condominiums above commercial space. And I can send the committee some additional material about that, as well as kind of more multifamily housing that has multiple buildings on the same site. To do that type of construction, we need an exemption to do more than 43 units per year.
So how many units in total do you plan to do? And as I recall too, your request was a multi-year request, or do I have that wrong?
The request that we applied for actually in October was an exemption from the growth management ordinance within a specific area of the project. So the center of the project where those types of buildings are planned. So in terms of extra units, we're not asking for extra units. The zoning actually allows more units than we are planning on building. What we're asking for is to be able to build at a pace where we can build these types of buildings. So the project overall, I plan to be a 20-year build out type project with 2,000 units. And through this exemption, that's no longer possible. So the exemption is requesting over the next 10 years to do about 870 units. So average that out, it's about 87 per year in that area of the project. So the exemption is really being requested.
Basically, it's doubling the exemption. Right now you do 40 and you're looking for 87. Is that it?
Over a 10-year period, it'd be 870. It's not going to be all the 87 each year. It's going to be based on the types of buildings and projects.
Okay, so it could be 200 one year and something much smaller the following year.
Right. So that's the nature of those types of projects. They're not houses. They're built, 40 units within a building, for example. So it's essentially over 20 years, it's the same build out as had been planned.
And what is the spatial unit of the area that you're asking the exemption for?
The proposal is about a 90-acre area in the middle of the project. And it includes what we're designing as sort of the town center. So it's mixed with commercial. So it's not just all housing. And again, so it's zoning actually allows a lot more units than we're proposing to build with the project. It's just the ability to kind of proceed with this type of construction is what the management work system allows for. That helps.
You satisfied with your
I guess I'm a little confused, but I'm not a planner. So, I mean, I don't really know. I mean, I just focus on the number of units, which you said is 870 units. But these are like apartments or condominiums or something else like that.
They are multifamily type housing, yeah. So it's 3 or more units in the building. It's how the town defines that. We, in our application, applied for an exemption. The council asks for a number. So that's the number we came back with over a longer time period. And so that's.
What do you envision? Do you envision any environmental impact or anything else for this level of building or this pace of building? Or do you?
So
Is that a smart question to ask, or is that something stupid?
So can I ask maybe a refined part of your question? For example, in that 90-acre block, are there wetlands?
there are wetlands bordering on the 90-acre block.
And will they be impacted?
There's a wetland approval that we already have in place. We're not, and we have no other additional applications pending. So we've been approved for a certain amount of wetland impacts. See those permits.
And what is your strategy for mitigating that?
So our mitigation strategy has been a combination of conserving land, providing donation to land trust, as well as paying a fee to the DEP and Army Corps of Engineers. So it doesn't change the area, like the amount of land to be developed, because this is all part of our master plan. It's really enabling us to kind of implement our master plan and design that's in place for the project. And in the GMO application, or exemption application, there are a variety of public benefits that are enabled by the exemption. That's one of the requirements. So one of the exciting components of the exemption is being able to kind of proceed with the town center plan that includes Central Square. That's going to be a public space. It's open for everybody in the community. This is an image of what it would look like. It's a central green with some green space, with some plaza space. We're also planning on a mixed-use building that, as shown here, that would provide for flexible kind of use. And you can see in this case it's a roller hockey rink, but it could be, there could be concerts there, there could be other events there. So that's a key component of a town-wide amenity. We're also providing space for a location for a community center. And we're also delivering on sort of the desire for mixed-use buildings, so restaurants, breweries, other kind of commercial components that, in order to be designed in sort of a town center way, are a mixed-use building. So upstairs would be residential that would be enabled through the exemption process.
What are the two big buildings in picture?
It's small from where you're standing. So the building right behind, this is the central building, the pavilion, that would have a restaurant in it and then public space all around it. The building behind it, it would have commercial on the first floor and residential upstairs. And then the two peaks, the smaller buildings to the right, it's just a concept for what a community center could look like. So that's the location that we've identified.
That's the community center, those house-like buildings?
They, maybe from your seat, they look like in our graphics, they're 2.5 stories. They're larger than a house for sure. That's shown as basically a 30,000 square foot footprint. So what the town's indicated would be desirable roughly in terms of the programming for a community center.
Are there other questions before we begin discussion?
I have
Or other
questions
thoughts? Oh, please.
about trails. Yeah, absolutely. So I have a lot of concerns about the connectivity and about the downs. Building it such that it's not, everybody who lives there or visits there doesn't have to be in a car.
Mhm.
And part of that concern is that, when you go into the roads that are currently built, they already don't necessarily include ways that you can be there without being in a car. So for example, the new road that was approved, I should say, that goes, I don't even know what direction that is, going towards Tipping Road, the entrance that road has no sidewalk, that road has no bike lane, has no space for anything like that. To me, I have a hard time understanding how that could be planned that way. Likewise, I see so much is under construction, there's so many roads to be built, and so of course that's forthcoming. There are sidewalks, there's a sidewalk on the road that exits this way toward Route 1. So that is one good connectivity. But I guess I'd like you to just speak to the the holistic nature of the entire property. And having truly integrated connectivity for the community to not be in cars and to be able to travel safely, which means you're not having to be on busy roads.
Yeah.
Be safe.
We share the same vision, so the overall plan has sidewalks and trail connections on 3 out of the 4 sides, and those 3 out of the 4 sides are to where there's people living and existing or future planned by the town sidewalks. So Route 1 has a sidewalk, and we're actually required in 2023, we're building a sidewalk connection all the way up to where Main Health is, down there on Route 1, to match into the existing sidewalks. Where there's a big gap in sidewalks now between the Comfort Inn and Millbrook, we're gonna make that connection. We're also making a sidewalk connection the other direction to Enterprise Business Park. So in that area, we're plugging into the network. We also are just completing right now sidewalk connection to the Sawgrass neighborhood, which has a sidewalk that then goes out to Sawyer Road. So that's our next connection that will be complete. I mentioned the Warren Woods kind of trail connections that we're building for Innovation District, which are to the woods. You know, they're not to another sidewalk system, but I think ultimately that can go down to Sawyer Road through a neighboring residential project. On Higas Parkway, the future road connection, which will be under construction later this year, is going to build a multi-use path out to Higas Parkway, build a crosswalk across Higas Parkway, and build a sidewalk up to the Beacon Apartments and to the Cabela's Plaza. So that's going to be completed this year and then ending next year. So that'll be complete.
What about towards the other direction? What are there plans the other direction?
Payne Road is the 1 out of the 4 locations that we're not building sidewalk because there's no town sidewalk network there, nor is there any plans for sidewalks.
I meant towards Route 1. So if you use the crosswalk across and then go towards Route 1.
Yeah, there's a sidewalk now down to Route 1.
Okay.
We're updating in 23, in addition to the sidewalk, sidewalk I mentioned to Millbrook, a new signalized intersection at Route 1, which will have a crosswalk across Route 1 to the south side of Route 1. So all of those improvements for the next 2 years are already complete. Payne Road, you're right, Payne Road, there is not a sidewalk up there. There's no plans for town sidewalks, like really between Cabela's and probably Shaw's.
There is a bike lane.
There's a bike lane on Scarborough Downs Road.
No, the bike lane on Payne, on that section of Payne Road. I was actually looking at that recently. So it does exist. And
we have a bike lane on Scarborough Downs Road. Up to Payne, there's some sidewalk, to your point.
And so how about the further connecting to an actual plans and finance connection to the Eastern Trail? You know, that is the artery for our town for safe bike traffic.
Sure. Yeah, I mean the sidewalk connection from Scarborough Downs Road, we want up to the light at Main Health and take you directly down to the Eastern Trail. That's probably the safest way to do it. A little less formal would be going down to what Higas Parkway, that intersection in Lincoln. But all of that is off of, that's not on the Scarborough Downs site. But that's probably the best way to get to Eastern Trail would be out down Commerce Drive.
I'll take one more question, Chuck, and then I want to see if there's any other members of the public who want to comment, and then we should move on to our discussions.
Scarborough is not a very bicycle-friendly town. And I haven't heard how this project is going to be really bicycle-friendly and perhaps set a standard that will emanate out from this being the center and changing that status from unfriendly to friendly. What goes on for bikes in here and around the perimeter of it?
Sure. Well, the road system within the Downs so far includes bike lanes on the streets. And we've started to also implement wider sidewalks that are really multi-purpose paths. So we've transitioned from 5 and 6 foot wide sidewalks to 8, which are for those that aren't as comfortable on the road. Those are what you'd expect in terms of a bike path. So it's multi-purpose. You run on it, you bike on it, you walk on it, jog on it. And so really the kind of the core arteries in the project will have these wider paths. Scarborough Downs Road really from the second residential phase all the way up to the future town center, up to Innovation District, which is the northern area of the project, and then on Market Street out to Higas Parkway. So that's really kind of the spine for having both a bike lane, but also a multi-purpose path for those folks that aren't as comfortable with it. And then all the smaller streets, right on the road or on the sidewalk, they're trying to be narrower. So we're trying to like slow traffic and not have super wide roads that do everything, but you can be safe and ride your bike on because the car travels through. But it's a very walkable design. I think it's walkable and bikeable. Project so far.
It's unusual to have authorized bike and walking in the same lane. I suppose skateboarding and everything else could do that as well. I won't take any more time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the background.
Jamie, I'm trying to share my screen. I was trying to pull up a picture of the Downs to give you guys a little bit of perspective.
Oh,
on
it
what-
just flashed.
Oh, there we go.
No, I think it was me.
Oh,
Do I have permissions to share? I guess is the question.
And then in the meantime, are there other members of the public who want to speak? Okay, thank you.
I'll try, Angela. I just made you a co-host, so that might help. Oh, and you know what? I bet it's because.
if I might try and put a little context on why we're having a joint meeting, if I could, and then we'll start the discussion. Thank you first for inviting the Sustainability Committee to join you all this evening. It's been something, the Downs, and not just the Downs, but Scarborough in general. The Sustainability Committee has tried its best to develop projects that keep us busy. For example, we've done the LED lighting around the town, converted all those. We have a trigen plant that provides the actual the hot water for the radiant floor in the public safety building. We've done solar on the community services building and a fire station and a bathhouse. So we've tried to keep busy and always looking at ways that we can be more energy efficient. And as we grew and as time went on, we took this role of sustainability a little bit further and talked about waste and recycling and all that kind of stuff. And the committee felt like, we have an energy plan and we worked hard in providing input to the comprehensive plan that was recently adopted. And we were talking in a meeting saying, well, we have this fantastic comprehensive plan, which is now a fantastic roadmap for the town. And we have development that is going gangbusters, and which has its pluses and minuses. We feel that sometimes, we feel like we don't have enough opportunity to catch the ordinances and all of those guidelines and planning principles that we use in the town to comply with the comprehensive plan. We need time to edit and revise ordinances and things of that nature. And the GMO came across our purview, and it seemed like that was a catalyst to accelerate even more the growth, and in particular, this growth in the Downs. And we're sitting back here wondering, oh, wow, we're gonna miss lots of opportunities because we don't have an EV ordinance for chargers. We don't have anything, we're not part of the stretch code. We only use the baseline code. And we feel like there's opportunities for solar and maybe even community solar, and we just don't have the opportunity to get these things incorporated into Scarborough's plan. So we thought that it would be nice if we came up with some ideas to offer the town council ways in which a GMO can possibly be compromised and work together as a team. The Downs is going to get developed. It just is a matter of how long and to what extent. And we all recognize that, and it's every right of the landowner to do such a thing. We feel, when I say we, and I hope I'm speaking for the Sustainability Committee correctly, we feel like we're going to miss opportunities if we go too fast. And so we decided to maybe offer some suggestions to the town council. And then we got talk, and Jamie then said, well, you know, there's some parallel paths between sustainability and the conservation board. And so we said, all right, maybe it's an opportunity together. And this is why we're here tonight, to see if maybe we could come up with, and we don't have to solve it. We don't have to have it concrete tonight, at least in my opinion, we don't, but we should start building an architecture that might be a help to the town council as they wrestle through this GMO question. I live in the town, I hear both sides. We grow too fast, we're not growing enough. We need workforce housing, but too much housing too quick is not what we want. We have traffic problems. So let's see if we can offer some suggestions to the town council that might help them be comfortable with the decision they make when it comes to a GMO waiver. So that's the architecture of today, I guess. And at that point, I guess I'll be quiet and let you take over the meeting again.
I think it's, let's open it up for discussion. I think we've had chances to review the materials, think about what we might want to bring forward tonight. And I think now it's our time to start talking.
Can I ask April one question?
Just one.
Go for it.
Can I ask you one question and I'll try to shut up? Maybe I was hallucinating, but was the town council going to get some independent, like an independent consultant or somebody to come in who was independent of both the town council and the Downs people to advise? And can you give us some details on that?
Sure. The council did approve that measure, and we did bring in a third-party representative to give us some guidance. We met with him publicly in February at a workshop, and essentially the guidance that he was able to provide for us was to give us his opinion on what was being presented by the Downs. And so I wouldn't say that the council necessarily used our consultant to ask probing questions that were not relevant to the specific request that was being made. And so it was more like they're saying they need this number. When you run your analysis, would you confirm that number? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. Was there a report that was prepared?
Yeah.
Maybe you can point me
Certainly.
to where I could find that.
Sure.
In the back of my mind, I was just kind of wondering whether the consultant would talk about the implications of the development in Downs, and so we might have a better idea of what that meant in terms of sustainability issues, for instance. Obviously, it's a lot of units, and it's obviously going to put pressure on town resources. And was any of that addressed in this report or not? Because I've looked at what Crossroads has provided, and I mean it's intended to persuade. You know why we.
Which is why we had an independent.
Yeah, why we should do this. I was just wondering what the objective data might indicate here.
Sure, the council chair is actually here, and I'm gonna have Mr. Clucci come right on up to the table here. If you, because you've been doing this longer than I have in terms of background or. Come on up.
So we did hire Jeff Levine, who's pretty well known in the state of Maine. He teaches at MIT. He had two other partners help review different aspects of this, both in terms of one, would it overwhelm our resources? Is this the best path? There's a bunch of different types of development that you can do, right? From mixed use kind of town center, what they're proposing versus single family, purely commercial. And his recommendation was that this is the type of development that would be most advantageous to the town from more of an ROI perspective. In other words, the revenue that's generated from this type of development will more than sustain the costs or the burden that's placed on the town. There is a workshop where he presented his findings, and included with that packet is the written report that is public. We also used him to initiate some of the discussions around the finer details of the GMO, like they're proposing the town center. What kind of standards do we have in there to help assure that that's the type of development that happens? And that's kind of where we are now. I think now it's in the lawyer's hands, basically, the details of the exemption, what will be brought forward to the council anyway. When that piece is done, we'll have a workshop to introduce it to the public and to the council, and then a public process. And I think that's where, if you guys have thoughts, that there's a couple tracks here. Right? There's going to be public input welcomed and solicited through the exemption, whatever way we decide to go. But there's also, this, if you see something that our ordinance should change, right? They're going to have to comply with all of our ordinances, whatever development they do. So if we need a more stringent building code and there's solid justification or reason for that, we want all of our developers to be playing by the same rules with that regard. Same thing with sustainability. If there are things so it's going to be difficult to make them do something with this exemption request that we're not going to require of our other developers. I guess is the point I'm trying to make. But that doesn't mean that you can't speak to what this could impact and what things we might want to consider, because we can change our ordinances. And the two can happen in parallel, and they might be staggered a little bit. But
that's helpful.
What is your time frame for this? How do you see this unfolding? When would be the target date for the approval of this GMO?
So I don't know that it's going to be approved. So that would be presumptuous of me. I'm hopeful.
And fundamentally, that is kind of the position I'd like to take. I'd like to have it thoroughly vetted so that we move forward in an intelligent fashion that is also equitable to all of the other developers and everybody else that lives in the town.
And then I would just add that there are a couple of members of the Conservation Commission who can't be here tonight, but they voiced the same thing, not to approve in the first place.
Yeah, personally, I place a lot of emphasis on fairness. I mean, intelligent people put the GMO position in the first place, and I just speaking for myself only, I think there should be solid, good reasons why waivers to the GMO is provided.
I think that's fair. I can tell you what my hope is, and some of this is beyond my control. I'm hoping to have a workshop to introduce the details of what we're actually talking about the end of June, early July. That the lawyer work will have to be completed for that to happen. And then the council is going to talk about what kind of public process we want to go through to further vet it. It's been around for 9 months now, so it's being vetted. That doesn't mean it's done. It needs to continue to be vetted. When you talk about the GMO, I wrote it. We were extremely stringent in terms
I
of.
used the word intelligent.
Thank you. I wasn't the only one that wrote it. I was informed by process.
I handed this right over to.
And that's why I wanted to join you guys tonight. So our authority to restrict development is derived from state law. And there's some conditions that you need to comply with in order to limit development. One of them is whatever limits you're setting has to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. That was adopted according to state statutes. Another one is that you have to allow at least the number of dwelling units or permits that you've allowed in the past 10 years, plus a little bit of a kicker, like 5%.
Would you clarify? I didn't get.
Yeah, so you have to allow at least as many building permits as you've allowed in the past 10 years, plus an allowance for affordable housing plus 5%. So that's the minimum. Right? When that piece of the ordinance is not very clearly defined, right? So does it relate to how many actual apartments or units you've had built, or is it to the actual permits that you've given out? Our interpretation was the conservative one. Is that we're going to go with the number of permits. So our number is much lower than the actual number of units that are built in the past 10 years. The other piece where it has to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. The zoning for this district, the CPT district, is outlined in our comprehensive plan. It was in 2006 and again in a revision. It calls for this type of development. So if you're going to, by having this second GMO mechanism, prohibit you from accomplishing that, then in my mind anyways, the GMO would not be consistent with your comprehensive plan. That's why we put the exemption process in there. Because we said, in general, no, we want to be as tight as we can. But we know that there's this project and maybe some other small ones that by doing it this way, there's no way those projects could ever be built. So there has to be some mechanism, and it wasn't very well defined. Probably should have been better defined in the GMO document. But it said the town council, if they see fit, can grant an exemption to allow these types of projects that we call for in our comprehensive plan to happen. And then the lawyers got into it, said, oh, well, we should try to make it similar to the contract zone process where there's a defined public benefit. And that's how we got to where we are today, basically. The Downs was very nervous when we revised the GMO because it did have a path forward before. Before they could have different entities building out different portions of the project and basically do what they needed to do. We tightened that up to say, no, I don't care how many entities you have, you're not getting more than 30% of the permits in any given year, which equates to 44 right now. So we forced them to go through the exemption process. It wasn't very well defined, and they've been patient with us. And they've done a lot of design work since we started on what the town center could look like. So I think that's a lot of forward progress. And there's a lot of other things that we haven't thought about yet that I think we need to think about. But I welcome your participation. I think, sitting here, the Housing Alliance also, there's a lot of different sides to this thing that we're trying to balance, right?
I think if I could, Chuck, I'm going to take privilege of being able to speak. I think that what I haven't heard, and thanks for that background. What I haven't heard is we're talking a lot about the built environment, and I haven't heard about the natural environment and how we are, what's named in the comprehensive plan, how we are protecting those resources and how these resources connect and support the full ecosystem. How are we looking at potential flooding, potential damage to our watershed, and ways that we can review this waiver request to ensure that we are taking those steps to protect the non-built environment and habitat. Yeah.
And our biggest conservation area is literally right next to this development, right? Warren Woods, and we approved another purchase at our last meeting, our first reading anyways. It's tough to balance. I know that they're under DEP oversight, so they need the permits to do what they need to do. And I think a large portion of the property actually needs to be not developed, right? Like maybe 200 acres.
That's the estimate right now, about 200 out of 500 acres is kind of space and conservation.
And how, are they contiguous 200 acres? How, describe those 200 acres.
There are larger blocks, and I didn't bring a presentation.
I know we didn't ask you to present, so thank you for your flexibility tonight.
I think we need to be really
So the
careful.
answer is
about-
no.
Really careful about how to use the terms of open space here. In terms of meeting the ecosystem services that Randy's talking about. Having an open area in the middle of town might be considered open space, but it is not fulfilling ecological properties that Randy's referring to. So we do need to be really cautious on the interpretation of, we're not going to put hardscape over 200 acres. Okay, that's good, but it's not necessarily synonymous with what she's saying. She's asking.
Chuck, you had
Yeah, I want to go back to, you mentioned sustainability concerning local resources. There's a bigger way to look at sustainability is global resources. And that doesn't seem to be discussed very much. Rick has brought it up, of course, and the sustainability committee does a really good job of trying to rein in emissions. That's my main concern is climate change. And, we have a state law, plan, Maine won't wait. And that is very ambitious, and it's a lot more ambitious than what the town is attempting to do. I guess that's my question. Do we, if there's new innovation, for instance, and this we come up with a deal, and there's a 10-year plan to build X units per year. Is that amendable? Can it be changed and standards be raised? Or is that going to be 10 years of building units that are archaic and destructive to the planet relative to what could be? You know what I'm saying?
So like the exemption isn't a lot. It basically lets you through the door. It doesn't do away with anything the planning board might have oversight of, anything the conservation or sustainability might have oversight of. And all those are going to
oversight over anything. Really.
Well, you can advise. And conservation, which one are you? Are you conservation or
conservation?
Yeah, you guys do have some authority, I think.
More than we do.
News to me. You're a committee. We're not even a committee.
She is shaking her head now.
Okay, we're advisory.
All right. All those things are going to change over the next 10 years, right? In terms of what you might advise us as a council that we should, different ordinances or policies that we should adopt. Nothing, this exemption isn't going to preclude any of that or preempt any of that. You're still going to be able to advise, we're still going to be able to adopt ordinance changes, and they'll have to follow them.
And they'll be applicable to an ongoing project that already has, okay.
Yeah, so
because there's not just this 800
to some
units.
degree, once they're
Right,
given
it
the
depends where
permit
they
to
are in
go-
the project.
Yeah.
go ahead and do it,
That's
then
what I
it
mean.
is
Well,
what it
they
is.
they don't get the permit, but so the exemption doesn't.
But the
they
permit
can't
is one
until
time
you get the
or
permit.
10 times.
Well, I imagine there'll be hundreds of different permits issued throughout
Well,
this process.
I guess if I could jump in a little bit, or waiting for Eric too, I guess, you're talking about a subdivision, and then you're talking about individual site plans. There's multiple processes that have to go through the planning board. So it's not a all one and done. And so they're not gonna have the capacity from engineering design to do it all at once, nor would they want to. Because of the cost of construction. So
I see.
I don't know if you want to chime in with that, but.
I mean, I was just gonna kind of say something what Councilor Calucci was kind of saying was that if we go through the process of updating our ordinances to, be more modern and have these more modern building codes and sustainable practices, kind of as Angela had said, we would have to apply it, the project have to be applicable to those. Going through the
stages that.
Yeah,
And the
going through
planning
the
board
planning
would
board
review it
process.
under the current, right,
And I think that as a town would even give us more of a motivation to get those kind of started year one, if this were approved year one, instead of doing it year 9 or 10. And from my understanding, I think the town is certainly capable of doing that, as the leadership and the people such as you folks on these committees to get that kind of work done. So, I mean, that's kind of what we'd be looking at and how we would approach it.
Well, the bottom line to me is that the climate science says that we have 8 years or whatever to really get climate control, climate policies in place to mitigate and to stop the onslaught of ruinous climate change. And so if we're not really trying to get out front and doing it, taking responsibility early on, we're really missing the boat, because you're talking about 800 units. And there's a whole lot of other projects that are hundreds of units before us right now. And all of those buildings are going to be around for 100 years doing what they do. And so it's a really big deal.
That speaks to looking at it town-wide, I think. Because
Yeah, I know.
I feel the same
I
way.
know.
As
And
far
when
as
he
looking
said-
at what's coming in the next 8 years
Right.
for climate change, things like that, you really need to look bigger than one project. It needs to be.
Absolutely.
Well,
And he said
That's why
what
we have a comprehensive
Yes,
plan.
right.
Yeah.
That's it.
But it strikes, I'm sorry, it just strikes me though that this is not, maybe I heard you wrong, but it doesn't sound like it's measured development. It seems like you get 800 growth permits, I guess that's what it is, and you can build a bunch in one year and few the next year. And then more the following year, as long as you keep it
That's the scary part.
under 870 over a 10-year period. Right? So I would guess that a lot of these are going to be front loaded.
I don't know about that, but.
Well, I don't know either, but I mean, my guess.
Well, you
is-
could put plans and you can get permits and everything, but not build because you're waiting on capital. But you have them, but they're only good for a certain amount of time. I understand that too.
Yeah, but
And then they have to reapply if they don't use them.
I have no idea what's in their minds, but my guess is that if I were a developer, I'd want to do it as quickly as possible. Get in, do it, and get out.
I don't think it'll all happen at once, and it's not, it's actually it's being spread out over a couple. It wouldn't not happen all at once. I guess when I think about, I actually think about this development model as being very well aligned with conservation and sustainability, because people are going to live in a very small area, right? Intuitively, it kind of makes sense to me, and you still want to make sure you're doing all those other things, but the alternative is putting those 150 houses around Scarborough a year.
From a carbon standpoint, it's not so much because of our current way we do things. Let's bring in a natural gas pipeline. Let's, do all of this combustion. And we have these state goals and national goals that ask us to go more electric. And to, as the grid gets cleaned up because of the renewable, and Scarborough is right up there. We have a utility scale solar ordinance now so that we can encourage clean energy going onto our lines. But when it goes into the buildings, what happens? Are they going to put electric heat pumps or VRF systems in instead of a natural gas boiler, or instead of putting a propane torpedo next to the building and run a boiler? So from a carbon standpoint, which is the catalyst for the climate, it is a little scary to look at it and say, well, we can get plans and we can go before the planning board and we can get all the approvals, and boom, that sets the bar at that particular time. What did we have in Scarborough to enhance the opportunity of reducing the carbon? That's the dilemma. And so we thought at the sustainability committee, we would go to you folks, the town council, and say, listen, granting a waiver is, their right, or applying for the waiver is their right. And it is up to the town council to decide how they want to negotiate that. And we wanted to say to the town council, well, if you're gonna negotiate, why don't you get them to do this, that, or this, or that, and that, and that, and that. No, I'm trying to be nice, Dan. But that's the I guess the urgency that we feel at the committee level is, this is a big footprint. This is massive. And if I was a developer and I knew things were on the horizon because of the comprehensive plan and committees are active in the town and they want to, they want to do right with the citizens, I would try to get as many of those permits as I can and get all these plans ready to go so that when I get my next permit, I'm ready to go. And we haven't gotten our ordinances up to snuff yet. And that's where we chose to maybe write or propose to you folks some alternative negotiation tools, if you will.
So I think that's a worthwhile effort. Even if it doesn't translate directly into whatever exemption language comes forward, it might help stimulate the discussion for those ordinances or ordinance changes that we need to make. It's tough for you to, we got a 6-person council right now. Part of it depends how the election goes, but there's a chance you're going to have a council that's receptive to making some of those changes. So I'd say whatever is prompting you to get together and make these recommendations, it really doesn't matter. I think the fact that you're doing it and you're trying to identify solutions that could help accomplish, what you're talking about, I think that's a good thing. And I'll read it.
That's good.
Okay, I'll take it to heart. I think most of the council.
No, I know. And April being the liaison to both of us, but in particular, she's been at some of our meetings and she's been trying to keep us, encouraged us to say, this isn't going to happen overnight. This waiver is not going to happen for a couple more months or 3 months. But then I also have put my reality hat on and say, how many of these ordinances can we get changed in 3 months or 4 months?
Right. And remember, this is
not
just
gonna
a
get one.
start. So we're not giving them a permit. We're just saying, by the time you get to the code enforcer to actually issuing your permit, you don't have to count against the cap that's there in that year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So from the point we say, yeah, you can, start to pull together this plan, they need to submit master plans, subdivisions, actually building plans, and then get the permit. And that's when, so you don't have to get that in all in before.
But I'm just putting my realistic hat on and saying, let's see, it took over a year to get a utility scale solar ordinance. We're nearly going on a year for an EV charger ordinance. And, that scares me when we start to look at the built environment and say, what are the goals of our comprehensive plan? How do they match up with the state plan? And can we figure out a way to reduce our carbon footprint when we're building these developments?
Rick, would you name some of the changes in ordinance that you would recommend?
Yeah.
You're the kind of the authority in the room, I think. On that.
Oh, well, I don't know all you see the book they gave me when I became planning board member. And I still haven't gotten through all of it, but you get nibbles and nabbles. But if I was just to shoot out, I think number one, Maine has a MUBEC, so we have code. Code will naturally help the cause. Every time the code changes, it brings in more energy aspects that reduces the carbon. So that's going to help. And then we have a stretch code, and it might be that we would look to Scarborough and say, why doesn't Scarborough go to the stretch code? So we're doing better than what is the base code, which would be a legal thing to do. It would just have to be, I'm sure there would be a stakeholder process. I don't know. It could be just the planning department saying, we're going to go to the stretch code. Okay, so we moved that. I think some of our ordinances go back to, the electrical code and that could be updated saying about the charger, make them whole homes need to be EV ready. Conduit, circuit and labeled, these kind of things so that we're ahead of the game when we're talking about meeting the state's goals. I think certainly going all electric is probably one of the biggest things we could do as a town that would help achieve the state's goals of reducing the carbon. And we do have the state does have very ambitious goals. And they're never going to meet it unless municipalities jump on board to help. And so I'm just trying to advocate for Scarborough to be a helper. So that would be some of the things I would immediately be looking at.
Do you see solar orientation as a big thing?
Well, that's in the code too. If they go and we upgrade a baseline code, then orientation of building, if you're facing a certain compass setting, it will be required that that house be solar capable, meaning the roof and meaning there's a conduit to power.
When you're building big projects like before the town now, you have the ability to orient the roads and buildings however
And the
you
planning
want.
board certainly has some leeway in positioning of buildings in sites and things of that nature that could bring it. But there's nothing in the code that's going to make a developer or make a building developer put on solar.
But couldn't be, so it's not in the code, it can't be in an ordinance.
I'm not so sure it can't be. I'm not so sure that the town can't say in a solar ordinance that thou shall do this. The code, the MUBEC code says that the municipality has got to enforce the code. It can't enforce another code or a more stringent code than what is the baseline code, or because we're a funky town, or state, we had to have a stretch code. That made it confusing, but that is a legal option to go by. But I'm not so sure you can't put something in an ordinance that says you shall face, a building that is of this size and this size lot face a certain direction so that it could be enhanced with solar.
So can I ask about that? I guess I have a hard time understanding the rationale of this. I mean, wiring a brand new build for solar is nothing. That's in terms of the added cost for the work, it's incredibly low. And I guess to me, I see that as sort of a failure to say that that's the code. It's just the wiring rather than actual generation of power. And to me, I have a hard time rationalizing. We're talking about 100% of the discussion is about new footprint. It's not about addressing our current carbon budget. It's about addressing our additional we're going to add on to it. And without explicitly saying, you need to be able to generate at least some of your own power to avoid having to generate elsewhere, it feels to me like it's missing the mark.
I feel like that is something that ordinances could do. That wouldn't be in violation of any code.
Yeah, I have not, perhaps I've missed it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I've not seen any actual solar capacity on any rooftops in the towns currently.
No.
Zero.
No, there is.
There is that right?
Yep, there's some.
Throttle, the car club has solar, the mainly tubs, the light industrial buildings use mainly tubs. IDEX is putting solar on. Those roofs they're large and they're generally flat. They're well equipped for larger solar generation. So.
But that's 3 out of a lot of buildings that were put on.
And those are commercial.
Those are commercial, yeah. I don't know as if there is a solar on one of the single family homes in the Downs.
Any of the housing.
And that's,
Or multiple units.
I can remember way back when the Downs we used to have conversations, Dan, if you recall, in the committee. We really thought there was going to be more emphasis put on solar through the sale mechanism and those kind of things, but it didn't happen. So that's kind of discouraging, but we can go forward and try our best to do more.
Well, the same thing with EV chargers too.
Jessica?
I have a question about level of service. Are there any requirements on, I'll call it green space or open space per person? I mean, development of 900 units, even with significant green space, is going to reduce the amount of green space per person in Scarborough. Are there any requirements like that? And in particular, like a second phase of that is this, there's publicly accessible and publicly owned. Those are very, very different types. Like a lot of homeowners associations say that they have publicly accessible green space, but that's not the same as public green space. And so while it's great that there will be additional publicly accessible green space, I do wonder what the impact on the per capita public green space is for citizens.
That's a good one.
I mean, I'm seeing a lot of green, but I think to your point, having some green somewhere doesn't mean that it's providing ecological services or really providing a public amenity.
Absolutely. That John should be able to, in some ways, or sorry, one of the councils should be able to answer that, because they have models about this is our expectation of number of occupants per unit in this type of housing. So you guys should be able to estimate the number of residents that are going to be living once the full almost 900 additional units are.
You must have done it as
right?
part of your fiscal impact analysis.
So they're, yes, and no. What they're currently proposing is a mix of 40% one bedroom or smaller, 40% two bedroom, 20% three bedroom for their mixed use developments. So you can kind of do some math for how many people that might have. And that's what our consultant did. I haven't tried to relate the conservation or green space. It's not per capita. It's an interesting metric. And maybe that's something that we should be tracking too, in terms of like, I think we're pretty supportive of the land trust and conserving more land. But what I haven't measured is, as we increase that conservation land, how are we pacing with our population growth? That might be a good way to look at it, actually. And I don't know what
Would you throw in the marsh with that as open space?
Well, I think
no,
that-
conserved. So it has to be, I guess.
Well, that's conserved.
Well, there's conserved and like I said, there's conserved and there's publicly accessible, and then there's public access. I think generally it was.
Yeah.
And this is something communities all across the country deal with. Like, well, what do we mean by open space? I mean, I'm working with a community foundation in Texas right now where they're like, well, is it providing ecological services if it's greater than 1 contiguous acre? I mean, this is not something that's people have at their fingertips. It's specific to the community, and I think it would take some additional conversation about, well, what do we mean by these categories of open space? Because I think there are some areas that provide ecological services primarily, and generally speaking, they're not like a soccer field that is for recreational use. But what are those categories as a community that we want, and that level of service per resident as we move forward? Especially when if it's one house, you're not going to change the balance that's being provided by a community. But if you're talking about over 800 units, it could very easily change that balance.
And likewise, we have federal policy that guides this already. I mean, it's 30% by 2030, 30% of all of our land mass. And so that number exists already of what our expectation should be in the town of Scarborough.
And that doesn't include marsh, I don't think.
It includes tidal marsh. It does.
It does.
It does, yeah, it includes tidal marsh. And so, we're currently at like 16% or so in Scarborough.
Including the whole Scarborough marsh?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that was bigger than that.
I think we're currently around 16%.
I have a question, John, about the 870 units over approximately 8 years. What in that report that was created, because I haven't seen that yet, was there a number on the estimate of population increase?
I don't remember.
So we're having two different conversations a little bit, because what was presented to us, I don't know that it was necessarily locked into this number that was said tonight. over,
Yeah.
that it was that number of units over 8 years. Is that the
I don't know
same?
where
Because
the-
that's not what the council countered with, and we haven't
I haven't seen
had.
anything over 8 years yet.
Okay.
I can
So
say
like,
that's
we
just-
haven't had a
Okay.
public presentation of kind of a final product. As John said, it's with the lawyers now. And so I don't know what the population estimates were, or if those were even the same as what was presented.
So our comp plan calls out 2,000 units over 20 years, roughly 100 units a year. When they did some of the pre-work for this development, I want to say it was 3,500 residents, about 300 school kids is what, I'm going off of memory, that's what I remember, at full build out. So that's after 20 years, basically.
So we have just over 15 minutes left till the time that we said we'd be here tonight. We have a few recommendations on the table. I heard Rick saying. And one of our desires tonight is to get some recommendations out there so that we can begin to work on them and then talk about next steps. And I'm not seeing who's online. If anybody has a question,
I've been
watching
monitoring
there.
and so no one has raised their hand, but it might be a good time that if anybody joining us virtually wants to make a comment or ask a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll allow you to talk. Well, and actually, I mean, yeah, I guess that would more be for attendees, but our panelists who are our committee members,
right,
are welcome to chime in at any time.
All right, Rita.
Yep, Rita.
Go ahead, Rita.
Hi, I just don't know if anyone around the table tonight, or maybe Chuck, you might know, are there other towns similar to Scarborough who perhaps are further along in their efforts to meet some of these state and federal standards in terms of sustainability and so forth, that we might look to as models?
I would say Portland and South Portland are probably the farthest along, and they've both adopted the energy stretch code that Rick was referring to, because they're in the process of implementing their One Climate Future climate action plan. So there's a lot of local support for them to take that additional step. Those
Yeah,
are the two that come to mind.
they're going all electric as well. Those that are interested, that new multifamily building that's going to be the largest in this town or in the city of Portland, that's all electric. And it's 16 stories high, I think, going to be 16. So they're doing all electric. And so there's a way to do it. We just customary want to bury a gas pipe, or we want to put a propane torpedo out there, or bring in a ugly fuel oil tank.
And again, that's specifically about carbon emissions and energy efficiency. In terms of conservation, they don't have a whole lot of undeveloped land to conserve. So we would have to look at what other communities are doing to look for local models.
In terms of conservation and environmentally sensitive areas, and I've talked with, or at least had email and phone exchanges with Emily and Pete, who couldn't be here tonight, just sort of bringing up their ideas around recommendations, maximizing setbacks from tributaries and none such as an important example there, creating buffers, focusing on contiguous green space so that we're reducing habitat disruption. And then looking at stormwater, I think we need to figure out what that might be based on what we have in place now and how we can at least minimize the flow of stormwater.
Well, and I think Angela can probably speak to that.
Okay, great.
Well, no, I was just gonna bring up a couple of things. We were talking about different ordinances. Well, something that might be relevant to something you guys talk about at Conservation Commission is, I was just at Long Range Planning Committee And we're starting to talk to them about an overarching stormwater ordinance, which under that would be umbrella would also include a low impact development ordinance, which not only is it something we should do, it's something that we're going to be required to do by the state on our stormwater permit. So I think that is something that when you're talking about like big picture, long term, that would capture things like when I talk about low impact development, it's really about how the site is situated. To your point, Chuck, I think we're talking about you have a blank canvas and how you position the building, how you use the natural terrain, how you don't disturb that natural terrain in some areas, how you increase buffers to not only our wetlands, our shoreline zone, our stream buffers, all of those things get enhanced through that ordinance. And that's coming down the pike, and it's already started as a seed, as an idea, I will say, but it's growing, and it's something that actually the Long Range Planning Committee is fully supportive of at this point now. They're asking staff to move forward with looking at it, even stepping back to not just look at it that way, but to look at it more of an overarching, like I said, a stormwater ordinance that would include multiple things in there, and also start looking at thresholds for development. Right now, if you're talking about an acre of impervious area, there's a lot of things less than that. And I know the planning board right now does a good job in working with staff to try to capture some of those smaller development sites where I try to be consistent with where it's practical too. Like if a site's all draining to one side, I work with the developer saying, if you guys look at this approach and also weighing your cost benefit analysis, there are more you can do. And start looking and brainstorming and looking at ideas for these smaller sites. It would be putting that all in an ordinance that's very specified though. And that's where there's a lot of work. So to Rick's point, they've been working on EV charging ordinance for a year. This is something that we're anticipating taking the next 2 years to develop. However, we are required to have it implemented in place by DEP by 2024. So there is, unlike the ordinances, I think that sustainability committee is working on that can go on and on because they have to keep working at it. We have a drop dead deadline, or we're not in compliance, and we could be fined by EPA. So there is something in the works, and I just wanted to kind of put that out for you guys too, to have, there is some hope that there's things that we can implement townwide. And I think that's really the key, is to try to capture those. And I know it's as quickly as possible, but I think in the municipal world, 2 years is it's pretty quick for an ordinance change of that magnitude. I don't know. I know it's hard to hear that, but it really is.
So how is Rick's concern dealt with? How is
What concern?
his concern about pacing, about implementing changes at a pace that keeps up with the development pace?
So you mean to change the ordinance at a quicker pace?
Yeah, he said
Well, I think you
correctly, it
need-
can't do it fast enough.
Well, I think there's a process, and I think you need all the public process, because you guys aren't the only stakeholders,
Yeah.
right? So you have to hear all voices, all sides, what
I
implications
know,
that might.
we're the only ones trying to save the world.
But I think
No, and your point's well taken, but.
In order to get through council, you need to come to council with, this has been fully vetted. We've heard all the pros and cons. Here's how we responded to those pros and cons. And this product we can all stand behind, right? That takes time to hear from everybody.
And especially with a topic like low impact development and stormwater, where it needs to be general enough so that it can apply to every single type of development that is coming through the planning board in Scarborough, but specific enough so that it's meaningful, and figuring out what that balance is so that we don't have an ordinance on the books just for the sake of having an ordinance on the books, and one that's actually going to impact and protect our water resources. That takes a whole lot of time. Because this is something that we've already been working on for over a year, and we can't come to any kind of agreement. We're working with a bunch of other communities to develop a model ordinance, and community to community and development to development, it's so different. So we're really struggling to find where are the commonalities, where's the kind of the minimum benchmark, minimum threshold, and then what can we add on top of that that will be meaningful for Scarborough? And it's a huge challenge.
But we will get there. And I think that's the good news is that we have a deadline that we must hit. So that's what we're starting now.
Would there be any value in expanding the sustainability committee so that they have more capacity to work on, the changes that we need, perhaps even the ordinance committee?
What does that mean?
Well, there are X number of people on those committees, and more people means more capacity for work.
Not always.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're gonna get more work done, the more people you have.
If you start specializing.
It might be more ideas, but we have the same amount of staff working on it. So doesn't probably speed along the process.
So, work that the long range planning committee is doing, the sustainability committee, on these new ordinances, we're looking at applying these into this set of recommendations for, as the town council reviews the possibility of granting a waiver. So
That's a tough thing to put on the council's shoulders to say. All I want to do, all we at the sustainability committee wanted to do was provide talking points for the counselors as they start to go through this waiver and define what exactly it's going to look like. But sure, I wanted some bargaining tools to say, all right, we'll give you 80 this year if you do this. Now, that's just me talking. It doesn't mean it's legal to do that or it's the right approach to do. But I just can't sit on my hands and say, okay, give them carte blanche and we'll hope for the best. Because we know if I was a developer, I would go in there for as quick as I could get it done according to, and follow all the rules, because I do believe that our developers in this town follow the rules. And if they're told to do something, they will do it. And that's not the problem. It's just, we don't have horsepower to tell them what to do. And that's the frustrating part. But I think we wanted to give you some horsepower by putting some thoughts in your heads. And I think we'll still plan on doing that as a joint group and give you, something to hash over within the chamber. Fair enough? Appreciate it.
Yeah. So we've got our July, each of our committee has our July meetings date set.
Right.
And reminding everyone on
there's a change, yeah.
Wednesday.
No, it is Thursday. I would love for everyone to join me at Counselor Corner Live. John Anderson and I will be hosting another event where citizens can just come. The topic is conservation and sustainability. It's at the Public Safety Building at 6:30.
Okay.
So we thought it was going to be here, but we're at Public Safety at 6:30. We'll put a note on the door at Town Hall too, in case people don't know the change, but I would love to have you come and participate. And it's just another opportunity to connect with council about issues in town that we might not have on our radar. And you guys are the experts in the room. So
And
Date
to meet
and
other
time again,
people
please?
who want to change the room.
this
This
Thursday, yeah, at 6:30 at Public Safety Building.
Will it also be hybrid?
It will also be
So the link is on the website.
Rita's put her hand back up, or is it still on?
Yeah, Rita, is that a new hand or leftover from the last time?
It's a new hand or an old hand?
It's still the right hand.
It may be an old hand.
Yeah, I think it might be.
It's not a new hand. How do I take it off?
Thanks, Rita.
Last words, other thoughts that we haven't yet covered tonight? Anyone want to share something for the good of the group?
I'll just say thanks again for
Yeah.
letting us hijack part of your meeting.
Oh,
We
this
didn't
has been
mean to be
great.
filibusters or anything like that. We just wanted to get on the same page with you folks, because it's
We
nice
wanted
to,
this for a long
to
time.
make sure that we're not living in our silos
Yeah,
and just going in our own direction, but we kind of incorporate the process.
Yeah.
I think Conservation Commission would like to weigh in too, as you try to affect.
I think it could be a
developments.
joint letter.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of similarities. We have the same goals.
Yeah.
So I think one letter, it's
Best.
less likely to get lost if you have just one instead of two.
Besides, we're just a commission, so.
You're more powerful than we are. We're
As
just a
counselor,
committee.
I want to hear from our committees. This is, I can't, I happen to have the privilege of being the liaison to this committee, but other counselor, we shouldn't take for granted that other counselors have any idea that these discussions are front of mind for so many of you. So let's make it more obvious.
Todd, did you have a comment?
No, I did. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Todd. Yeah, no, well, it was something that I just wanted to share with both groups, not so much related to the topic at hand, but I was just in Colorado for the week working on it. It was planning and management operation for community centers and so forth, and I can't wait to share with the council and the steering committee when we get to that point if we do. But one of the things I found fascinating is Colorado is growing so fast, and they're the #1 state in parks and recreation and a lot of conservation. So a couple of communities, and I got to go back to my notes, and I'm going to kind of reach out to them. They've gone so far because their ordinances and the policy is so far behind. They are purchasing developable land and hanging on to it to decide what happens versus letting developers decide what to do. And so they're buying things.
Yeah, but they've been in the marijuana business for a lot longer than we have. Yeah, a lot of money.
If there's, again, there's those tracts of land that have. all the
Oh,
things
you're
we
right,
talked
though,
about
that is-
That are out there, and so how do we identify some of those moving forward to say, if that became available, how do we become a steward of that, whether that's through our land bond board or something else? And I know we're gonna be talking about a land board, our metrics for approval, and how do we purchase? And so I think some of those other conversations have to be had to say, to give us that time to do some of the processes that we're talking about, not just to react to something that's in front of us all the time.
They're also fortunate that they have great outdoors Colorado funded by the lottery. So
Yeah, they get a lot more.
they have a lot
Something
more
to strive for.
resources. And a lot of the communities have passed local measures, for conservation.
No, did you have something?
I just wanted to ask the counselors here, as both like a member here and also as a parent and citizen of Scarborough. I understand why you have to look at things at this top level of return on investment. I get that. However, if you only use that lens, that's when quality of life really deteriorates. And most of us live in Scarborough because of the quality of life here for many different reasons. And there's sometimes choices that we have to make that I wouldn't say trump return of investment, but massage the return of investment. And I really ask that folks keep that in mind as you're deliberating these things and really think about how is that really going to impact it? Like for example, I brought up getting to Eastern Trail by bike. I would encourage all of you to ride even a quarter mile on Route 1.
I wouldn't do it.
I do, and I
I know
have.
you do. I see you with the
with my
vision.
kids, and saying to me, "Oh yeah, the bike path is going to go along Route 1." That's not quality of life. That's not going to get people to want to be there and do that. Route 1's not going to change with traffic. It's going to get even busier. It's going to get even faster. And so having that as the solution, like we need to be able to walk on that road. That's fantastic. But those are the kinds of things, the essences of quality of life that get missed. We say, "Oh yeah, just go down that way. You'll figure it out." This is the mark. And that's just one example. I'm not trying to like say this is the only thing we need to talk about. It's just many things. But I just really want to encourage you guys to, like, as you're deliberating these things, to take a step back and say, okay, how really does this affect? If I want to do these things, what's it really going to feel like? Yeah,
Can I just ask one philosophic question? I know.
Here he goes.
No, when you were crafting this GMO, because you admitted that you were the author of it. I didn't know that.
I started it.
I didn't know that, but now I know it. So I'm
Well,
gonna ask
it was
you-
in place 20 years before, but we had to revise.
I'm gonna ask you a philosophical question then. When you were crafting this GMO, how do you orient to waivers? Did you think that this was something that people were gonna be routinely coming into you and asking for waivers? Or did you feel like, what was going through your mind when you were doing this?
So we wanted to flip the table. The way it worked before is we had a reserve pool where the council could authorize a certain number of permits to go into the reserve pool, and then the planning board would be obligated to issue them if they met certain standards. So it was never tangible, right? We weren't looking at actual projects. We were saying, oh, okay, there's the reserve pool's empty, we should put another 500 in, which is, they did it a couple times. What we changed was now there's a clear accountability measure. So if you want access to more than the bare minimum, you need to come before the council, and the council doesn't like to say yes to stuff like this, right? There has to be a good reason to do that. So by itself, I mean, we've been dealing on one exemption request. I don't remember the date. I think it was October, it was before I became chair, when they submitted it, before it was on the council.
Dan knows.
He knows. And they, honestly, they talked to us 2 days after we passed the new GMO, trying to initiate the process. So, you know, you can look at it whatever lens you want. I can tell you we've issued a heck of a lot less permits this year under the new GMO than we had in the previous 3, right? And we're cutting our average in half. And we're talking about it, right? It's not just happening. We're not putting up 500 units on Honeycomb Parkway with nobody really knowing what's going on. It's going to be deliberate and intentional. And I might take some flack for that, but that's okay. I think it's in the best interest of Scarborough in the end.
It has to pass the council 5-2.
Super majority.
It's a super majority too.
No filibuster?
You could ask other council.
No, that's good. You know, to your point, the financial models are always what we look at, and that's what developers look at. But the cost of carbon is becoming astronomically high. If you really want to look at it through a financial lens, it's drastically, unbearably high. We got to do something
To
about
the future, we will pay.
So can I throw out 2 big ideas? Maybe you guys can think about it.
Absolutely.
I'm on board with sustainability and creating our own power. How can we do it? Right? Do we have any measures in place? We've got a solar ordinance now.
We got
Starting at 0. Can we go
stormwater
somewhere?
detention ponds that make great pedestals for solar.
Okay. So that's stuff that could make a real difference. And I might get shot for this, but no, why do we need Route 1 coming this way? Why can't we divert people to the turnpike before you cross the marsh?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, that's,
Okay, 2
Yeah.
lanes, 20,000 cars, go someplace else.
yeah.
So then we're rebuilding Green Road. Is that what you're saying?
No, but you might need to take over the property.
Yeah.
That might lessen the cost of going over the marsh with the bridge that we're gonna have to end up building here.
Well, it's timely, at least
That's gonna
think
happen.
about it.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's gonna happen no matter what.
Oh, yeah, I know. But we can only have 2 lanes to go that way.
Take a lane, put bikes on it. I mean, there's precedent for that,
Absolutely.
right? I'll get shot. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get shot anyway, so.
Say that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
It's been a great discussion. Thank you,
Yeah,
Rick,
thank
and the Sustainability Committee.
Well, thanks for inviting us and.
Staff, would like to see all the staff here.
Thank you.
And 2 counselors, it's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, now we have to show the council support and be at their council quorum.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, guys, don't leave me there on Thursday night by myself.
Adjourned.
Yes, we are. Hold on, I'm so excited. How's the game?